we can go to central London, where we're joined by the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock. Thank you very much for being with us this morning, Mr Hancock. So, it's the morning after Super Saturday. How do you think it went?
Well, I think that from what I've seen, although there's some pictures to the contrary, very, very largely people have acted responsibly. And this balanced message is so important. People should enjoy summer safely. And of course, the emphasis is both on enjoy and safely. We of course, everybody knows that we're doing everything we can to get back to normal, but only to do that where it's safe to do so. So overall, I'm pleased with what happened yesterday. It was really good to see people out and about and largely, very largely, social distancing.
So you say that you're pleased with what happened. One person who's rather less pleased is John Apter, the chair of the Police Federation. He was out on a night shift in Southampton. He tweeted to say that he dealt with happy drunks, angry drunks, fights and more angry drunks. And then he said what was crystal clear is that drunk people can't/won't socially distance. Now, we know that the rate of infection, the R rate, is creeping up. It could even be above 1 in London. Is it really a sensible thing to reopen pubs?
Yes, and of course there's incidents like the one that you just described, and we've seen that throughout, that there have been individual incidents that have been very unhelpful, but the large proportion of people, the vast majority of people, are, I think, doing the right thing. They are, increasingly people are able to use the freedoms that we're restoring. I had my hair cut yesterday and I'm very relieved about it. But also doing that responsibly. I think the police have done an absolutely fantastic job throughout this crisis. Really, really difficult job. And the same again last night, when the vast majority of people followed the rules, did the right thing. And of course, we'll take action when we need to, if the minority break the rules.
Is it OK, though, if the vast majority obey the rules? Because even a minority, we know, with this virus, can cause infection rates to go up quite dramatically.
Well, we'll, of course, keep this very closely under review. And you've seen, for instance, in Leicester, but also in other places, that we don't shirk from bringing in more drastic measures if that's what's needed to control the virus. But the overall plan has always been, through this lifting of the lockdown, to try to lift the national measures, but also be absolutely crystal clear that we'll tackle local flare-ups when we see them. And we've seen that in a number of places, and we've taken targeted action and targeted measures, and then if that hasn't worked, we're fully prepared to take the action like that we took in Leicester. But at the same time, we've got to try to move to a more close to normal, where people can do the things that they love, and that's been our plan all along. And my overriding message to people is, yes, enjoy the new freedoms, but do so safely, following social distancing. It is so important, and even the basics like washing your hands. We have got this virus getting right under control. The number of new infections is under 600 on the last data, so it's really coming down in terms of the number of positive cases that we're finding, and that's good news. But we just got to have the resilience and the resolve to stick at it, and to be very careful in how we enjoy those new freedoms.
I'm keen to talk about Leicester because the numbers do show there's a significantly higher rate of infection in Leicester than elsewhere, which, of course, is why they've seen this lockdown. Are clothing factories, where there appears to have been pretty poor social distancing, to blame for that?
Well, we are very worried about the number of infections in Leicester. Clearly very high, 3 times higher than the next highest city in terms of the testing results. As you know, we put more testing in, but that doesn't account for the increases. The increases over and above that which would have been accounted for by the increase in testing.
So are the clothing factories
we've
to blame,
seen outbreaks. Well, we've seen outbreaks in food factories and in clothing factories. There's some quite significant concerns about some of the employment practices in some of the clothing factories in Leicester. They are important problems to deal with, but the number one problem that we've got to deal with is getting this virus under control. And so we've put in a huge amount of extra resource into Leicester, working with the local council, and the teamwork there this last week has been very effective, and I hope that we see the results of that come through in the numbers and the testing as soon as possible.
It does seem to me that you can't really separate the bringing the virus under control with the employment practices. It feels like they could be pretty significantly linked. And what I don't understand is, we all abided by this very strict lockdown in our personal lives, and yet employers were effectively just given guidance on what to do. If I'm looking at, for example, the guidance from the government on this, it just says, employers should decide in consultation with their workers whether it's viable for them to continue working from home. Where it's decided that workers should come into their place of work, then this will need to be reflected in the risk assessment and actions taken to manage the risks of transmission in line with this guidance. I mean, I can't help thinking, this sounds quite weak. The good employers will do the right thing, the bad employers will just ignore it. And this matters not just for the people who work in these conditions, but for the rest of us too.
Yes, the thing is, though, Sophie, that guidance is statutory guidance. It's backed up by health and safety legislation, and there are very significant fines that can be levied if it's broken. Furthermore, we can. Also, what we're doing at the moment instead is we also have the authority to be able to shut down a business if it doesn't follow that guidance. So there's significant enforcement. Yes, and that's happened, absolutely. Normally, it's happened in consultation with and working with the employer, with the business in question, but we do have that power, absolutely. So the guidance is not, we're not just asking nicely, we're very clear to businesses that these are their responsibilities. For instance, the same goes for the responsibility for hospitality businesses to take the names and the numbers of the people who are there, so that we can do contact tracing if that's necessary.
See, some people might be wondering if this is all a bit too late, though. You can impose fines, you can shut down businesses after the problem has already happened. And for many people, looking at what's happened at Leicester, they may be wondering if you were just too slow to act anyway on the lockdown. The Prime Minister said that the government first took notice of an issue in Leicester on the 8th of June. You spoke about it at the press conference on the 18th of June, but the lockdown wasn't imposed until Monday, the 29th of June. Why did it take so long?
Well, we were acting right from the start when we first saw, and in other parts of the country, the early action, targeted action that we took was successful. For instance, in Kirklees is a good example where we did close some factories, and also in other parts of the country. In Leicester, we took the same sort of action. We put in the extra mobile testing units. We worked with the council. That wasn't effective. It was clear that the outbreak was wider in the community, and that's why we had to take the firmer action. But in your question, you said, why do you wait to see that there's a problem before you shut the businesses? Well, of course, we have to follow the data. You have to see where the virus is and where it's spreading, and take the action to tackle that outbreak. This is exactly how the next phase of this control of the virus is expected to play out. We explained in advance, as we released the national lockdown measures, that the next phase would be all about local action, local lockdowns, whether that's an individual GP surgery or shutting a hospital to new admissions, or a factory, just as we were talking about, or then much more significant citywide action. Having the tools to be able to take that very targeted action when we see an outbreak is there, so that we can then release the measures on everybody else, and have a much more targeted approach. And it is clear that that plan is working.
The question that I was trying to get to, the point that I was trying to get to, is whether or not you've taken too much of a soft messaging around businesses from the very beginning, talking about guidelines, talking about consultations, rather than the more forceful message that you could argue that you've taken with people sunbathing or sitting down in parks. Now, you've always said that there will be a time to learn the lessons from coronavirus, but now isn't the right time. This could be one of those lessons. And I just wonder if, when would be the right time to start learning lessons? We've got fears of a second spike coming, potentially in the winter as well. What are the lessons we need to learn now to make sure that we're prepared for when and if that happens?
Well, we're learning all of that all of the time, looking at what works and what needs improvement. So, for instance, in the last fortnight, we've made sure that we've got the data on testing results out to local authorities. So, all local authorities now have that data, and if they need support in interpreting it, then they can come to us and ask for that support. Making sure the question you ask about shutting down businesses is an important one, but of course you have to do this working with an employer. Because there's many steps that you can take before you fully close a factory to make sure you isolate the people who either have the virus or have been at risk of it. But I come back to the central point in your question, which is about the messaging to people watching this programme about what to do this summer. And the central point is this: yes, go out there and enjoy summer, and get out and enjoy the things that we love, that we've been able to lift the restrictions on, but do so safely. And there are two parts to that. There are two parts. Enjoy summer safely. It's a really important message, and I think it's one that the vast majority of people understand.
Now, it's, of course, the NHS's birthday today, 72nd birthday, one of the most challenging periods, it feels, that the NHS has ever gone through. The Observer is reporting that NHS England has asked the Treasury for £10 billion to help cover some of those costs of coronavirus, but they're nowhere near an agreement. Is that something that the Treasury should grant NHS England, given these exceptional circumstances?
Well, I just don't recognise that story. We've been working very closely with the Treasury on making sure we have the funding that we need, whether it's for PPE or for the extra support that's needed in hospitals, or for the Nightingale project, or for the use of the independent sector. We have an enormous amount of support from the Treasury. I'm incredibly grateful
all the money
to
it needs,
Rishi Sunak. Well, we've been working throughout this to put literally record sums into the NHS. The Treasury have worked alongside us. They've been brilliant throughout it. In terms of, we have at pace needed very significant extra funding that they've put in. Just last week, the Prime Minister announced another £1.5 billion for the NHS. That will be to expand our A&Es for this winter, because with social distancing, many A&Es across the country are going to need to be bigger. It's also for maintenance, which is much needed, and to get on with capital projects. So the Treasury we've been working hand in glove with them throughout this.
Rather than a few minutes clapping that we've seen, of course, would the best birthday present for the NHS be a pay rise for some of its lower paid staff?
Well, we absolutely want to reward NHS staff for what they've done. I mean, on this 72nd anniversary, we should remember that this has been the toughest year in the NHS's 72-year history. The lengths that NHS staff have gone to have been incredible, but also the flexibility that they've shown, the amazing increase, for instance, in the use of technology, which has improved many of the services, the ability of people to step up when it was really needed and take on decision making. So there's many things that we want to bottle from the good things the NHS has done in response to this crisis. Putting up the Nightingale hospitals in 9 days. It normally takes 9 years to build an NHS hospital, and we did those in 9 days. So there's a lot of really good things that the NHS has done that we really want to bottle and learn from the future.
OK, no news there on whether a pay rise is going to be forthcoming. Now, I hate these questions because I know you're not going to give me anything, or you give me very little. But, of course, we're expecting the mini-budget, if you like, from the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, next week. Lots of focus on jobs, of course. There's lots of rumours about potential apprenticeships, VAT, something on stamp duty, maybe. Is there anything that you can give us for what we can expect from next week?
I'm afraid I can't.
Come on.
No, I think the way that we've put an economic package together, both in the heat of the crisis with the furlough scheme, it's been one of the most generous responses in the world. And then with the Prime Minister's speech last week, a very significant investment, but also critically a direction of travel, which is that now is the moment to invest and to deal with some of the long-standing problems, for instance, underinvestment in transport, and the need to deal with some of the areas of the NHS that we're putting money into. And so we have, alongside the health response, had a very, very significant economic response, and you'll get more news on that from the Chancellor on Wednesday.
On that economic response, because we'll see a little later in the programme, I went to Birmingham this week to have a look at some of the sectors that are being particularly hit by this. And what's pretty clear is that not all sectors are being hit equally. So, hospitality, retail, these kind of sectors are facing a real uphill battle. Often women working in those sectors. And yet the Prime Minister's announcement last week seemed to be centring around jobs in infrastructure, in build. Are you actually really lining up the jobs where they are needed and the investment where it's needed? Or are you just kind of almost using old solutions to what's a very new, unprecedented problem?
No, I think that is the wrong way round, if anything, in that there are some long-standing areas that we need more investment in, and this is what the Prime Minister's speech was focused on. But also the amount of support that we've put into those areas that are particularly hard hit. You mentioned hospitality, which has only been able to start getting and going again yesterday. The amount of support that we've put in during the crisis has been unprecedented. So there's been support across the board. But, I know, and coming from a small business background myself, I know how much of an impact this has had on businesses, and on smaller businesses in particular. And the sense of, something completely out of the blue knocking your business over is a real sense of injustice. I understand that. And we won't be able to save every business. But we have been able to put in an unprecedented package. And I think that the Chancellor and Prime Minister, who've obviously led the charge on that side, I think they've done a very, very good job in putting together the best possible support package. But there clearly needs to be more, and we respond to circumstances. And hence, on Wednesday, what you'll hear from the Chancellor is a package focused on jobs, so that we can get the economic recovery from this virus as fast as we can, whilst also keeping in place the action that's needed to deal with the virus and to keep the virus right down.
Now, we are running out of time, but there's one quite important story that I do want to ask you about in many of the papers today on the Chinese telecoms giant Huawei. Now, there are reports that ministers are going to start phasing out its involvement in the UK's 5G network after security concerns raised in a report by GCHQ. I mean, that would be a pretty significant U-turn from the government. Is it true?
Well, I wouldn't comment on leaks of that kind. What I can say, though, is that when we came out with an interim report on this earlier in the year, there were a number of conditions that needed to be met. And so I'm sure that the National Security Council will look at those conditions and make the right decision on this to make sure that we have both a very strong telecoms infrastructure and everyone can get a phone signal, but also that it is secure. And that the British government can have confidence that it is secure.
So fair to say there are concerns?
Well, I'm not going to say any more. I'm not going to get into any more details than that, other than to say that we have been looking very closely at this. And if you look at the report earlier in this year, there were certain conditions in that and I'm sure that the Culture Secretary, who's responsible for this area, will come forward if there's any more detail.
I can't resist asking the final question. We've heard that Kanye West is going to be running for president. Do you think he'd make a good president of the United States?
It's the first I've heard of it. I think I respect the office of the President of the United States, and I'll support what is our strongest and closest ally, no matter who their president is.
So you could definitely do business with Kanye West then?
Look, I'm absolutely not going to get involved in the US presidential election. I'm concentrating on the running of this country. What I will say is that we absolutely support our relationship with America, no matter who the occupant of the Oval Office is.
Very diplomatic. Thank you very much for being on the programme this morning. Thank you.